All right, guys, joining us today on the podcast is Jeremy Hurst. Jeremy is a curious human who is a lover of thoughtful conversation, deep self-inquiry, and is an advocate of combining modern practicality with the ancient wisdom behind mindful practice. He is a big believer of providing value, continual improvement, and being curious in all respects of life. He expresses himself and this philosophy through the platform of the same name, value, improvement, curiosity, as well as through hosting the Mindful and Intentional podcast. Jeremy is also the co-founder of Idenati, a software platform aiming to declutter the internet by introducing principles of minimalism to our modern digital mediums and devices. So with that, I'd like to welcome you on board. Thanks for joining us on the conversation today, Jeremy.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today, Jeremy. And Liz has given us, I guess, some cliff notes for, the Jeremy that I guess we see online and those sorts of things. But what we'd really love to do and invite you to do is tell us your origin story, where you're from, how you've come to be the Jeremy of today, and feel free to go back as far as you'd like. We'd love to hear all about it.
Sure thing. I grew up in a town on the northern border of Philadelphia. It's a town called Abington. And, when I think about my childhood, I think the most defining characteristic was that I was always a child in motion, so to speak. I played a ton of different sports, right? Basketball being my favorite, but when it wasn't season for basketball, I was playing soccer, baseball, even dabbled at tennis, which I was terrible at, but we won't go too deep into the tennis story. I was also a very, very strong student, but it was also important to me to be popular in school and talk to all the girls and have tons of friends. So I was kind of constantly in motion, which I like to think is a good thing, keeping young people and kids busy. But, when I look back on it and not to apply too much kind of post facto narrative to the story, I think a lot of the constant motion had to do with not wanting to deal with trauma, so to speak. And I'll give you maybe a couple different examples. One of which is, my name is Jeremy Hurst, and I'm named after my mother's husband, who's not my father. So that maybe will tell you something about the situation that I was born into. My mother was permanently brain damaged in a severe car accident before my first birthday. And I don't know a ton of detail around the accident, but I do know it had something to do with the type of life that she was living. My biological father died while being incarcerated for manslaughter. And, it wasn't a manslaughter, you get in a car accident and somebody dies. He actually killed another human being with a hammer, but it was deemed that there was no premeditation or intent, so to speak. So, I point all of this out not to create some sob story or something like that, but rather, I only have recently realized in the last few years that I actually haven't had conversations about any of those things. I was raised by my grandmother as a result of that situation that I just described, and she was an amazing woman. I kind of credit her for saving my life, so to speak, but she also wasn't good at talking about trauma. So I think I kept myself in constant motion and busy doing different things. I maybe told myself it was resilience or strength, but I think it was more likely fear and avoidance, kind of psychological coat of arms, so to speak. So, that all led up into going to university at New York University here in New York City. And again, I did very well academically, but that same tendency to keep moving didn't really stop at all. it changed a little bit because it turns out I wasn't actually good enough at basketball to make the team. So this athletics part of my identity kind of fell away. But of course, in college, you can replace that with additional studying. You can replace that with a lot of additional partying and free time and exploration in the city. But that tendency to just continue moving and not really partake in any self-inquiry or try to sift through the traumas that I had experienced as a child. I ended my college experience still not knowing at all who I was or what I wanted to do with my life. So I kind of think of those 4 years in university as kind of lost years, so to speak, as I didn't do the type of deep work that maybe I would have liked to. But ultimately, when I was graduating, because I didn't know what I wanted to do, I basically just went to the NYU careers page and basically made a list of all of the biggest and most reputable companies on that page and started applying. And ultimately, that's how I landed in the world of technology, which of course I developed a love for, but it was kind of a winding route to that world and kind of the world that I play in today, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Crazy story, man. Thanks for sharing. An incredible story. And there's so much that I'd love to touch on, but, I'd really love to sort of bring you back to, this disruptive upbringing you must have had as a kid. I mean, what was that like for you? And what do you remember of it that, maybe was that first gave you the impression that it was disruptive and different, in your younger years?
Yeah, I think so. When I went to live with my grandmother, she put me into a private school. So I became kind of a token Black kid in a primarily white school. And that was yet another kind of challenging psychological situation that never really paused to have the conversation about like what that meant or how I felt about that. I think one result of that environment, being a lower income minority student in a school that is 95% white, it was of course very apparent the wealth disparities, right? If I ever went to someone's home, 4-car garages and 6 bedrooms and golf in the backyard and these types of things. I didn't even know golf was a thing when I was growing up. So I think I developed a little bit of latent shame of where I came from and who I was. To this day, there's a lot of my extended family that I have virtually no relationship with. And I think the reason that I kind of spent so many years not kind of trying to figure out who I was and where I came from and how all of these different people may have contributed to the situation that I ended up in. I didn't want to do that work because I was ashamed of that past. And, it's only really recently that, you can kind of see in a lot of families with money, there are lots of other things lacking. And, now I'm starting to explore some of those relationships. Some of the most loving and caring and empathetic people, perhaps the economic means aren't there, but it turns out life is kind of a give and take when certain things are missing, other things kind of compensate and vice versa.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I guess you've had these experiences where you've seen both sides of the coin. And we hear about it a lot where there's, people have a lot of finances or, they're considered wealthy that they're lacking in these other areas of life. And what sort of, I'm just interested, like in your situation, what are those sorts of things you saw that were lacking? Was it things that your friends said to you, or things that you just observed? Like, what were some of those things, and how young were you when you realized that? Because I think a lot of us realize that when we're really late or later in life.
Yeah, I think one of the things that stood out to me was that oftentimes, and it's kind of a interesting observation, but a lot of times when money is present, money takes the place of maybe more substantive foundations for relationships to be built upon. So, you know, when someone has a birthday and gets a car, like, that's a really amazing celebratory moment, yet the dad's not present at the birthday party because he's working in some other country, you know, doing a deal or something like that. So, you know, I noticed this in a lot of different friends and people that I knew, is that money became this stand-in for love and support and lots of other things that are I know now are incredibly important for self-development. You know, money tried to kind of play that role, which I think it does a pretty poor job at. So that's probably the biggest one that stands out to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really interesting you put it in that way, that it kind of acts like a stand-in. It's like it feels that, because I've come across, you know, some stories quite recently as well of people that are very wealthy. They're people that, you know, are friends of people I'm close to, and, you know, their families have this extraordinary wealth, yet the same thing, like you said, their parents are in a different country, right? And the children have been in a country for years and years by themselves. And, you know, some of them aren't in a very good mental state at the moment. They've had all the resources available to them in the world, except their parents. And it's very interesting, I guess, to note that, you know, as you put it, that people try to use money as this stand-in that's not really, doesn't turn out to be as substantive as I think they'd hope. And then it's kind of like, where do you draw that line? Because there's also the argument to be made of people are trying to provide the best for their children and do things, but then, you know, it kind of doesn't really turn out that way for some people.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's a podcast that I recently listened to. It's called Track Your Life by this guy, Boyd Vardy. Is that name familiar to either of you guys?
No, not familiar to me.
So highly recommend the podcast and looking into Boyd Vardy. He's a South African wildlife conservationist. And recently on this podcast, he does this kind of retreat into solitude, so to speak, for 40 days and 40 nights in the South African wilderness. And he does a daily podcast each day to kind of allow his followers to join in that experience. And on one specific day, the podcast that he releases is called Defining Abundance. And he offers up this description of wealth. And I think it's probably the best definition of wealth that I've ever heard. And I have it, you know, written down. I've been coming back to it for the last few months, trying to basically craft my own definition. But I think, you know, growing up, wealth meant economic means. Wealth meant, do I get a car for my birthday? Wealth meant, how big is the house? Like, wealth meant, do I have the new thing? Like, all of the things that consumerist culture tells you wealth means. But in this podcast episode, Boyd describes wealth in he almost writes this poem to describe wealth, and he describes wealth as stillness. He described wealth as adequate rest. He describes wealth as strong relationships, the ability to feel and to connect with other people around you. He defines wealth as being creatively engaged and having work that you deeply care about. You know, he has all of these different attributes and ways of describing it. And I think it takes some real kind of conscious analyses to come up with some type of definition of wealth. And it takes kind of a steady questioning of that definition and revisiting the definition to make sure that it's kind of evolving and changing as the priorities of your life kind of change as well. But I loved his definition, and he probably does a better job of describing it than I do.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting thing to talk about, and like I guess it's lifting the lid a little bit, so to speak, and you know, especially in a society that is, you know, generally dominated by I guess the premise of economic growth and continual progress in this sort of way. Like I've just actually been reading a book by Fritz Schumacher. It's called Small is Beautiful. And it's one of these books that it was written in the 70s. And he talks about, you know, exactly this thing about identifying the fact that, you know, society at large, we've sort of been consumed by these emotions of envy and greed to the point where we've lost sight and connection with what's real and what's true for us, you know. And this is sort of what bridges the gap to me in terms of what's the difference between true wealth is and I guess financial wealth or economic wealth, is that we've sort of lost sight of you know, the truth of what the purity of life, the connection with life. And when we lose sight of that, we essentially, you know, we have we're not aligned anymore, you know, we're not in tune with what is real, with reality, right? Where we've got this veil that's sort of shrouding our view of what's truly important and real in our lives. And like you said, when you're able to introduce a little bit of essence of mindfulness, the principles of stillness, and these sorts of things, you're able to sort of let this noise slowly quieten down and find the connection of what truly brings essentially peace and fulfillment and contentment in your life. And like this story that you tell of your upbringing, I think it's one that many listeners and I myself, you know, would resonate with, just because I've lived that life as well, in terms of that wanting to run, that need to chase something, you know, in avoidance of connection, in avoidance of inquiry, in avoidance of you know, asking ourselves the hard questions that subsequently and paradoxically lead us to the true, you know, essence and beauty of life itself. So yeah, it's a very interesting thing to talk about, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this idea shows up, you know, over and over and over again in almost every area of life. I mean, you know, Shaun, I think you're pretty engrossed in the fitness world. And, you know, when I didn't make the basketball team back in college, you know, I was like, well, this part of my identity is falling away. I'm going to just start going to the gym way more. And I started doing 2-a-days and, you know, hitting the dining hall and eating twice as much. And I was the heaviest I've ever been. I mean, I'm 5'7.5", and I was 195, which is not a healthy weight if you're not a bodybuilder or something like that. I was just walking around and couldn't touch my toes and these types of things. And at some point, when you stop worrying about, you know, the aesthetics of being big, and you start thinking about what it means to be healthy and what it means to be strong, you realize that it's not about the next set or the heavier rep. It turns out like rest is just as equal, just as important to doing the next set. It turns out not just eating more, but what you put in your body. It could be less, but what you're putting in your body matters, right? It turns out they're, you know, actually kind of doing less can be more, right? And, you know, for me, when I first discovered the world of mindfulness, I mean, this was kind of the, you know, mind explosion moment. What, like, it turns out sitting down for 15 minutes a day doing nothing is maybe the most profound addition that I could ever make to my life, right? It turns out that focusing on your breathing and bodily sensations can help me tune into what it feels like to be angry and frustrated, and help me kind of operate in my life with more equanimity and to have a better relationship with my wife and my grandmother. Like it turns out slowing down and doing less quite often is the solution to being more effective in lots of different ways.
Most definitely. And I know I can tell already Les is deeply resonating with you, because Les's personal creed is more and less, right? And it's something that I've been trying to adopt myself as of late. And I can attest to it as well. Like you said, sitting down with yourself for 15 minutes, it can be profound, right? Especially if you're someone who never, ever used to do that. You take that time to actually figure out how you feel, why you've been running so hard, and just, yeah, like you said, being in tune with the sensations of your body, and you can start to tap into why you're acting a certain way, because you can start to understand why you feel a certain way. And then in doing less, we're actually getting a lot more out of it. And I'd love for Les to give his thoughts on what you just explained for us.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like you said, more and less is really a way of life for me. And it's as simple as those three words, and it's also infinitely deeper and more profound than I could ever explain, and this can be applied in every micro moment of my life and in anyone's life, and like, my feeling is that there's a great aversion to, quote unquote, doing nothing, because it seems counterintuitive to what we've been taught, up until this point in all our lives, in terms of this societal conditioning, and the need for production and efficiency and speed and all these types of things. But I need to remind people all the time that, as I teach meditation, that the choice, the intentional choice to do nothing and sit in the stillness is still doing something, right? It's a beautiful choice that you're making, right? To turn it, like, essentially ignore what is outside, the noise of the outside world, and really recede inward and find a clarity and peace that rests within each of us, right? And this is the only way for us to really do that, to continually tap into it. And it's not so much something that you will, ever master, in the sense that you will come to a point of mastery and realization and, quote unquote, enlightenment, right? This is a challenge for us to be applied on a moment to moment basis for our entire lives, until we are no longer able to consciously make that choice, right? Until we take our last breath. And that is like, to me, like a beautiful analogy for what life is truly about. It's a challenging thing for us to, put ourselves in front of every single moment, right? But it is a choice to challenge ourselves, to continually to get better. But then, we only get better to cope better with this, beautiful struggle that is essentially existence, that is, the ability to have, a cognitive thought and thinking and intelligence, and to try and make sense of what it is that life truly is. So yeah.
Yeah, extremely well said. And being an entrepreneur in the world of technology, what's incredibly interesting to me is that this same phenomenon is playing out in the world of technology, right? It's this constant desire for more, right? There's a new app for everything. It's happening on the consumer side. It's happening on the enterprise side. There's software for chat, and a different software for video, and a different software for collaboration, and a different software for customer relationship management, and a different software for inventory, and on and on and on and on and on. And turns out you could do a lot with Google Docs. You know what I mean? Like as a very kind of crude, simple example. And of course, you can't run a $2 billion company with Google Docs. That's not kind of what I'm suggesting. But you know, part of what we're thinking about at Idenati is this idea that, you know, the internet has kind of surreptitiously taken over our entire life, right? In the span of, call it, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago, you know, if I go back 20 years, the only thing I was doing on the internet was, I guess 20 years, when I was 12, I don't even know if I had the internet when I was 12, maybe AOL Instant Messenger or something like that, right? Email and chat. And then, you know, got to college, and it turns out your syllabus is online and your class schedule is online. And then at some point, maybe you get a credit card and it's on auto pay where you're paying on the website. And, you know, now everything is digital. Every single facet is digital. Like people are, you walk outside, everybody has headphones in. So they're streaming, you know, Spotify or Apple Music or something. You walk into the subway, everyone staring at their phone. You walk into any office, people are sitting in front of a computer for 8 to 12 hours every single day, right? Our entire lives have been taken over, and much of it is good, right? There's a lot of productivity, quote unquote productivity and efficiency gain. But, you know, at some point, maybe about 2 years ago, I was, you know, employed full time, working, you know, leading a sales team at a software company. And I was working on a couple different side projects. I think, Shaun, you and I are kindred spirits with the hustle mentality, trying to build and work on different things. But I was sitting in front of my computer one night, and, you know, my browser had 45 different tabs open. I've got like iMessage, Slack, you know, I'm got my phone, like TV's on. And I was just like, what the hell is going on? You know what I mean? Like, what am I doing? And, you know, I'm pretending to do 45 different things at the same time, but of course, multitasking is a mirage, right? You're just very quickly switching back and forth between all of these different things. And there's kind of a cognitive exhaust or a mental switching cost every time that you do that. So in everything that we're trying to do is, like, how can we, you know, simplify and organize that experience to allow you to actually focus and pay attention to the things that matter? And hopefully, if we can help people do that effectively, maybe they can spend less time online, right? Because I don't know about you, but every time I talk to a friend or a relative and I ask them, like, you know, what was the highlight of last month or last year? Or what are you really excited about right now? They generally talk about offline things. They talk about, you know, the birth of their niece. They talk about someone getting married. They talk about running a marathon, how excited they are to accomplish that, the book that they're working on. Like, all of these things where people find deep meaning and deep purpose generally isn't like doing email triage or like doing something on Twitter or like all of these different things. So, you know, hopefully if we can do our jobs well, there's less of an incentive to multitask and keep so many things open, and we can kind of return people's ability to focus and really pay attention to the things that they want to spend their time on.
It's amazing, man. I think it's so interesting that you say it's coming from someone that's in tech, right? Because essentially what I take from what you're saying is to pay attention to these offline moments and to try and have more of them, right? Whereas it sounds kind of counterintuitive for someone from the outside looking in saying like, Jeremy's a tech guy. Why would he be telling me to go offline, right? But I think that's really cool. And that, like, the point to that is if someone like you is telling people or is able to identify that, right, being so deep and heavy into that world, you've got the insights, man. And I would really implore people to listen to your advice.
You know, it's funny, you know, being in circles with other entrepreneurs, other people that work in technology. It is mind-boggling the number of technology executives that don't allow their kids to use social media.
Yeah.
That give their kids no screen time at night after school. You know, they set up all these rules and restrictions and then go to work and build products that they don't want their children using. So, you know, I'm the first person to say that technology is amazing. You know what I mean? So like the other part of what we do is like empowering people to do incredible things online, right? That from a dorm room, somebody can launch an e-commerce store and build it on Shopify and use the necessary tools. And, you know, our software allows them to interact with all those different things more efficiently. So we're empowering people at the same time, but trying to kind of apply these ethical or sustainable principles in the process of doing so. But yeah, no, it's crazy to me how many people just like completely cut off, you know, people in their lives from these tools. It's probably just like, you know, maybe 30 years ago, that was the tobacco executives making sure that their kids were nowhere near cigarettes and these types of things. But it's pretty funny to think about.
Yeah. Well, it seems it is quite an addictive medium, right? And for all of us, no matter how much willpower we have, if you listen to other people as well who've been in the tech world and developed these platforms and things that we all use, they'll tell you that it's like they're designed to keep you there. It's that 100%. Never that infinite feed, right? And when it's infinite and us wanting to be humans, and it's like that red pop-up box and the notifications. I've noticed like on my Facebook now, I keep getting these super useless notifications. Right? I've gone from
hasn't posted in 2 months.
Yeah,
or like
that's right. It's like someone who you haven't interacted with in 17 years posted a photo. I'm like, why are you telling me this? And then when you stop to think about it, it's like, it's because as a person who wants to get through shit, I have to get that number to 0. And for sure, it's picked up that it's like every time this guy comes on, he has to mark them all as red. So we're just going to give him more. And maybe if you give him more, he'll stumble across something that he likes, and then he'll stay and he'll go down the rabbit hole. And then the ads we can show him because he's online all the time will pop up and he'll buy some shit and we'll make more money off it. Right? But like,
you know, it's so funny, right? Because what you're talking about, you know, the same idea that I just kind of mentioned, that the idea that the internet has surreptitiously taken over our lives. I mean, because that process has been so unconscious, people have never sat down to be mindful or intentional about that process. So I'll give you a very tactical example. You know, I have in my identity account, to maybe to give you a description of identity in more literal terms, when you log into the software, basically transforms everything that you do. All of the different websites get transformed into tiles, almost like apps on a smartphone. So in my account, I have a bunch of different tiles. Probably 4 or 5 of them are for Facebook, but those tiles point to specifically where I want to go. So I have a tile for the Facebook advertising manager, because normally you go to facebook.com and you land in the feed. And that's where you see the little red circle with the 12 notifications about Bob from elementary school who just got married to Susie, who you don't even know, right? So, you know, optimizing your experience to help you to actually get things done is a huge part of the internet, because, you know, going to Facebook and then clicking up into the menu and then going to the advertising manager takes 7 seconds, and chances are you get distracted by the cat meme and somebody's beach, you know, your ex-girlfriend's beach photo that's still looking pretty good, right? You know what I mean? They purposely design the feed and what to show you first to make you scroll a few times. So, I mean, Facebook is just one in a myriad of examples, but you know, I almost think of identity if Google is the search engine for the open internet, identity is almost your search engine for your own private corner of the internet, right? When I search finance, I get my 3 brokerage accounts, my 2 credit cards, and my bank accounts, and not random finance stuff from, you know, Wall Street Journal that wants me to click so they can show me some ads, right? It's very tailored to my own experience, and there's no notifications and pop-ups. Like we send very, very, very few emails, because ultimately people should be signing up to take some value from the software, and they should understand the value of that software without us banging on their door every 6 seconds to try to get them to come back. I think you might be on mute, Shaun.
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's a super interesting way to look at it. And so do you guys design that, like, do people curate it themselves, or is the point of the software to kind of give people that tool to be able to not be so easily distracted and to hone in on the things that they want to be focused on?
Yeah, so people curate the experience themselves, because ultimately your experience online and the things that you do are likely very different than Leslie, are likely very different than what I do. So each person completely curates that experience to match whatever it is that they're doing when they're on a computer.
Yeah, and that's really cool. And I think that makes sense, right? Because the other way around is kind of what's happening right now, which is we're all being fed these things which, you know, subconsciously we don't know we're being drawn towards. And then that's kind of dictating the experience. Where what I like about what you just explained is we do have to, I guess, slow down, be mindful about what we want to achieve, what we want to experience when we're on the internet, and curating it would allow us to do that.
Yeah, very, very much so. And it's, you know, it's interesting you asked that question, because one of the decisions that we've had to make in the past was, like, you know, when people sign up for the product, there's kind of a choice that you can make. I can try to make the process as quick and easy as possible. And the way to do that would be to basically try to, you know, maybe ingest all the data from your browser to look at, like, your favorites and your browsing history to kind of curate that experience for you. But I would almost equate that to, you know, recently I just moved into a new apartment, and it would be amazing if there was a button that I could press that says, move all of my old shit from my apartment into my new apartment and everything is done for you. Like, that would be amazing. But turns out when I moved, I threw out 12 trash bags of garbage, of stuff that was in my closet, things that I no longer use, clothes that I don't like. I donated a bunch of things. You know what I mean? So, like, that process of actually being intentional of, okay, where am I putting things in my new space, and how am I going to optimize my life for today and not 7 years ago? It's actually a really important part of the move itself, right? So we made a decision to say, we're not going to make it easy to just upload all of your history from Chrome, because it turns out you're just like 98% of other people who've been very mindless about their experience on the internet. And if we ingest all of that data, you're going to have the same garbage experience that you've kind of built without thinking about it. So it does create a little bit of friction, or a little bit more work that people have to do up front. But turns out anything in life that's worthwhile requires a little bit of effort and a little bit of work.
And you know, and it's to me, it's funny that it even came up as a part of a consideration that we need to consider these types of things, you know, in my mind, you know, to introduce accountability and responsibility into people's lives. But this is what it has become, right? This is, like, you know, the drawbacks of an over progressive and over technologized world that we live in, right? And I love, like, and it's not to say I do agree with you, and I myself am a lover of technology to a point, right? And that is important. That is very important to note, because I think that technology, like anything, it's a tool. And we have, like, I like to use the analogy of, if we, you know, reflect back to our hunter-gatherer ancestors, right? They, without the tools that they developed, you know, they wouldn't have been able to, you know, catch different types of or hunt different types of animals to then feed their tribe and continue to sustain themselves and eventually thrive as small communities into bigger communities and things like this. But if they were, like, overly focused on developing, you know, these unrealistic tools to catch a million animals at one time, then they sort of lose focus of what is actually necessary for them at this point in time, in this moment of, you know, their lives. It's simply to sustain, to feed themselves, feed their families, and stay alive, essentially, right? There's nothing more to that. There's like the difference between this want and a need, essentially. And to me, there's like this fine balance that needs to be played, and we need to sort of tread that to a degree. It's not to say that, you know, we can't, you know, indulge ourselves with nice things every now and then, but where is the I guess, where is the point where we sort of say it's enough, and we have enough shit in our house that we've filled ourselves with and sort of just pushed to the side and filled up this empty space that has become more, you know, meaningless? Because, you know, coming back to, you know, this view of over commercialized, over economic growth and all these sorts of things, there comes a point where the natural resources that we are using up to feed this growth is going to dry up, you know. And if we, you know, essentially win this battle of continually growing economically, we will essentially be, you know, losing in terms of the beauty and I guess the world that we live in, essentially, right? Because at some point of utilizing all the natural resources, it's going to run out, and there's going to be a point where we can't turn back. So I think there's that fine line to be tread in terms of tools to assist ourselves and assist us in the betterment of life, but then not to become reliant upon, and then also, you know, making us essentially very lazy and inept at living life, essentially, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up two really, really huge points in there. This point about resources drying up, I think, is a really poignant one, because in the world of natural resources, things are finite, right? Oil is finite, steel is finite, all these things are finite. Of course, there's recycling and whatnot, but things are still finite. The thing that is fundamentally different about the world of technology is that attention is infinite. And attention is actually the thing that's being mined by all of these digital technologies, right? Turns out you can be sitting in front of the TV watching Netflix with your laptop open on Twitter and your phone open on Instagram. So what used to be an hour of time can actually be 3 hours on 3 different platforms. So that's what becomes really, really interesting about this world of attention that a lot of these companies play on, is that actually it's kind of an infinite market that they're playing with, right? Everybody thought social media was dead, and then TikTok shows up, and turns out kids had an extra 2 hours of time somewhere to be, you know, doing little dance videos and competitions with each other. You know what I mean? Like, these things can just show up out of nowhere, and you know, it's wild how, you know, it turns out 1 hour becomes 3 because you're on 3 different things at once, right? Of course, while not doing anything particularly productive. The second point that I took away from what you just said was about, you know, how human beings have always used tools. And of course, tools are very important, kind of separates us from every other species on the planet. This tool analogy, though, starts to break down when it comes to digital technologies as well, because if you think about a hatchet or a hammer, you know, maybe a hammer you go get from the toolbox, you maybe build a chair, and then you put the hammer back. The hammer doesn't like play on your psychology. It just lies and waits for the next time that you need to use it. So I don't know if there's maybe a new word that we need, but I think that tools are things that we get to deploy at whatever level of capacity that we deem relevant, and then we get to put them away. Social media, even email, right? Like most people, spend a couple hours a day in email, most knowledge workers, so to speak. And, a lot of people open up their computer, the first thing they go to is email. And it immediately puts them into a reactive state. Their time and their day gets deployed based on whatever other people are dictating that they spend their time on, right? I have this rule where 7:30 to 11, don't open email, because that's my most productive time. And I think that I should be in charge of that time and how I spend it, rather than it being dictated by whatever the incoming, ping says it should be spent on. So, I mean, just something as simple as like what is the default? Like defaults are incredibly powerful. Like the default apps on your phone, the default, Google as the default search engine, defaults are incredibly powerful. And if your default is like you open your computer and Twitter is open from last night, or the first thing that you see is your email, or whatever the first thing that you see is, chances are you spend a lot of time there, more so than other places that might be better uses of time. But, the way that we use tools and resource allocation, the world of technology is turning so many of these definitions and so much of our nomenclature on its head. And, maybe there was never a space where it was more necessary to be mindful and intentional with how we're spending our time. Because if not, I mean, technology addiction is rampant, and it's frightening. Totally. to be honest.
Totally. And look, I think that, your example there in terms of blocking out time for not using certain applications or technology is, and a great example of how we can make the choice and really have the responsibility for how we utilize these tools that, we have access to. I truly believe that, like you said, an introduction of mindfulness into anything in life, we have the choice to do anything. I understand that, social media at large, it has, motives that it's trying to drive, and it touches and presses on the wounds of, our human emotions that are easily triggered and easily drawn into. But at the same time, just as your example, and like anything, we can choose to, pick those tools up, or we can choose not to, right? Our phones, they're in our hands all the time. We can turn off the notifications. We can choose not to, check that email when the ping comes through. We can choose not to check Instagram once that like notification or whatever it is, right? There's that choice involved, and the introduction of mindfulness creates a space for us to, put that space in between the cause and the effect, right? Instead of it being a reactionary thing. And I say it quite, nonchalantly, but it is a difficult thing for us to do, especially in these times with, like you said, how these tech companies, they prey on this sort of these urges and desires from humans just to find connection through these mediums. But it's just funny. I mean, even if we say that these technological platforms can quote unquote create time for us, or create perceptions of expansion of time, in your example of having multiple mediums of your phone, your laptop, your television, and things like this. I always come back to a quote that's to do two things at once is to do neither. I don't believe in multitasking. I truly don't. And if you apply it with the lens of mindfulness involved, it just doesn't work. The enjoyment and experience, the true experience of life, is to experience the moment in front of you and whatever it is in front of you right now, and that's it. There's nothing more to it. If you're trying to experience more than one thing at once, then you're not experiencing anything. Presence is timeless, and that's the paradox there, right? we try to create more time through, you know, doing more things. But when you're present, then time, the concept of time, it truly just fades away into nothingness, and you simply experience, you know. So yeah.
You said it far more eloquently than I said it.
There was something that you touched on, which was really important, which was like the intentionality, right? And when you talked about the tools and how we use them, like the hammer, that was really interesting to me, because you're right. When we want to use a hammer, we're like, I want to use the hammer, I pick it up, I use it, and then I put it back. And it's whenever I want to use the hammer. But on the flip side, the hammers don't use us, right? Whereas like a lot of these platforms, they are using us without us knowing. And that's the interesting part. And I think, yeah, being mindful of that and having intentionality around how you use things is super important for people to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I feel like it's this question of choice becomes, I think it's a lot more problematic than maybe first meets the eye, because it's fairly easy to say, we all have the choice. I can choose how often to use my phone or not use my phone. I think average screen time now is like 3.5 or 4 hours or something like that. Yeah. I guarantee you, if you did a survey and asked people, how much time do you want to spend on your phone every day? None of them would write 4 hours. So this question of choice, maybe, I mean, we clearly do have the choice. There's no one holding guns to anybody's head, but I don't know if choice is maybe the right word, because, you know, coming back to kind of how the technology industry has been built, because attention is the resource, consumers are trained to not pay for anything on the internet, right? So part of, if you look at like behavioral psychology and habit formation, building habits has a lot to do with how easy they are to build, right? So when all of these products are free, and when these products are in your pocket, and, you know, it's much easier to use Facebook than it is for a 14-year-old to maybe get a pack of cigarettes, right? They gotta, you know, stand sketchily outside of a gas station and try to hand somebody a $20 bill or something. Yeah. You know, harder drugs, of course, even more problematic to get their hands on, or something like that, right? But the question of choice becomes so problematic because the effort required is so small. It's so small, right? It's always just right there in your pocket. Yeah, you could turn off the notifications, but yeah, and I have turned off all my notifications. It helps greatly. But I don't know. I think this question of choice, I mean, there's folks like Sam Harris has a book called Free Will, and it's a really short book. I definitely would recommend anybody read it. It's like 90 pages long or something. You can read it on an 1.5-hour flight. And he brings a neuroscience background to it, but he would argue that free will actually doesn't exist, that almost everything that you do is neurological and chemical reactions inside of your brain. It's conditioning, it's the society that you've grown up into, it's the culture, it's all of these things. So again, choice becomes problematic. You know, I was just at home in Philadelphia over the holiday, and my 17-year-old cousin was there, and I have never seen someone stare at a screen so much. Like she was just watching TV and movies and games and all just constantly. And of course she has the choice to not do that. I'm not sure she does though. You know what I mean? I think that everything that she sees and her friends and her social circle, and like that is what kids do. Mm-hmm. So to expect a 17-year-old to exercise choice, to opt out of that system, I think is maybe too tall a task, so to speak. So I don't know. I think we have to think hard about this question of choice. I don't know if it's a question of thinking about certain types of regulation in the case of children in technology. You know, for me, the way that I try to combat it is not to sit her down and say, hey, let's talk about how much time you spend staring at your phone. or these types of things. I try to make it easy to give her alternatives, right? Coming back to that effort question. So when she woke up and she got out of the shower, I was like, hey, I want to walk with me with the dog, right? I tried to fill that time with activities, right? We got back, I said, hey, I got all these ingredients. Let's make pizza. And she started to like look at the phone, and I was like, hey, let's put the phones down while we make the pizza. Let's like, whatever the case may be. So again, I tried to subliminally remove the choice and fill the space with healthier habits, right? And I think that I don't have any kids myself, but my wife and I are starting to have conversations about having our first kid and these types of things. And the thing that we talk more about than anything is not talking about what kids should do, because I think kids don't listen to anything that you say. Kids watch what you do, right? If you use profane language, if you're always on your phone while you're at the park with them, if you're like again, the choice and the conversation isn't what matters. It's what they see, and it's what they assimilate from their environment, and it's the type of opportunities that you give them to partake in more beneficial activities. I guess I try to think a little bit differently about choice, but you make a great point. It's just not. I don't know if people are quite as equipped as we would like them to be.
No, and I would agree with you. I would agree with you on that, because when you spoke about the screen time and the average screen time, I get that ping that comes up on my phone every Sunday, and it's like, you spent this much time on your phone. And I'm like, I spent how much time on my phone? Right? And I'm all about like choice and being intentional and having your own decisions or making your own decisions. But I do agree with you, that I think it's very hard for us to exercise that when we're not conscious of what's actually going on, and these things are running in the background, and we're reacting to them, right? We're just reacting to them. And the accessibility is a really interesting point as well, because it's like goes kind of hand in hand with that health question. It's like, well, right now where we are in, this point in time, as humans, we have everything available to us to live really healthy lives, right? There are people who are incredibly healthy, living for, into triple figures till they're 100. We know a lot more about our health and how we should eat and how we should move, things we shouldn't do if we want to live a longer life. But shit, man, people are getting fatter. People are getting lazier. They're getting more unhealthy, right? And so I think, there's all these things, like you said, the environment you're in, what you see going on around you, and how you respond to that, which we're doing subliminally. That's actually affecting us, and maybe we don't have as much of a choice. I think we do have a choice, but maybe we're a bit ignorant as to how we're exercising the faculty of choice. Yeah. Right? Because otherwise we'd all be super healthy. But we all fall into habits of eating poorly or not going to exercise and all these things. And like you said, I think if we took a survey of people and were like, do you want to be healthy? Everyone would say yes.
Of course.
Right? But like, we don't do it for this myriad of reasons. And I think, maybe it's in terms of how choice is actually playing out and exercised.
This is what I want to say about this, right? And it's a tough topic to talk about. And my saying it the way that I do is just I guess it's an expression of how I see it and how I exercise it on a daily basis, on a moment-to-moment basis, right? And I think that's sort of key to having the ability to exercise choice and free will to the best of your, ability, right?
Precisely.
But of course, the accessibility of things has made it, infinitely more difficult for us to do so, especially if you have been conditioned and brought up in this world, around this environment of great abundance, great accessibility, that like is very, counter to our ability to exercise free will and choice. But because it is more difficult does not mean it's not possible, and it's not there. And this is the point I make. And like I said, for me to say it doesn't mean that it's easy. It's very difficult, and it's a a moment to moment practice, and it will forever be a practice. And practice infers something that you can never master, right? You are always trying to improve on, like, on exercising free will and choice. And by doing this, like, by introducing mindfulness and creating that space in your life is the best chance of you having to do that, right? You create space in between every sort of thing that subliminal urge, whatever it is, and then you stop for a moment before you make that decision as to what you need to do. And like, let me tell you, you're going to fall on your face time and time again in attempting to make the right choice for you, the quote unquote right choice, what you think is right, for the betterment of your life, for the betterment of your health, all these sorts of things, right? But it is always there, and it is always going to be difficult. But we must, like, when we are at a place when we acknowledge that, and we realize that, yes, it's always going to be there, but it's always going to be difficult, we give ourselves the best chance, right? And that's all it's about for me, right? Like, for me, I will always say that we always have choice in everything that we do. And that is an interpretation of what we feel is best at this point in time. And that's always going to evolve as we evolve as human beings. My perception and conception of what is right and the right choice for me is going to change. Maybe it's different in 5 years' time. But for me at that moment in time, when I am present to make the choice, I'm going to make the choice, or try my best to make the choice that is right for me. And that for me is it. Like, I will never say that we don't have choice. And I understand completely where you both are coming from. It is becoming increasingly more difficult, to the point where it may even seem like it's impossible to even have free will and choice, but doesn't mean it's not there. And I want to make that clear for everyone.
100%. Yeah. And to be perfectly clear, I think you and I are perfectly aligned and in agreement in that. I think, I only point out what I did, maybe because maybe it's just that I struggle sometimes with the right language, so to speak, right? When, for example, I'm in a book club with 8 other guys. We had a meeting about a year ago, and one of the guys in the group is just vehemently against mindfulness, like vehemently. It was almost like he got, spanked by a monk as a child or something. Like, I don't know what has caused this like certain derision in his mind.
Let me get at him, bro.
Definitely gotta put you in touch. And it's, it was so surprising to me, because when he kind of went on this little bit of a rant about, part of it I think was the meditation and mindfulness in a Western context has become kind of an in thing, right? It has become a little bit cliched. So I think a little bit was feeling a little bit of a revulsion from that narrative, so to speak, which makes a ton of sense. There's tons of people that are what is the word I'm looking for? Virtue signaling, so to speak, and talk a lot about mindfulness and actually don't even practice mindfulness. So I completely understand that reaction. But my question to him was, have you ever tried it? And he said, I sat down a couple times for a few minutes and just nothing happened. It was like, and I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, can you completely rule something out that you tried 2 or 3 times for 5 minutes? If you don't understand, impressionist painting, and you saw like somebody's meme on Twitter about impressionist painting, like, could you just rule that out as an artistic category? No, of course not. Like, you would have to maybe understand the history and who are the famous painters, and there's a whole spectrum of impressionist work from lots of different artists in different parts of the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like, one, he's never really experimented or explored it in any real context. He's never read a book about it or a real kind of knowledgeable article or anything like that. So as somebody who's very open to, intellectual discussion. I was surprised at like the lack of exploration, yet making such a strong stand against something. But coming back to this idea with me, perhaps struggling with language, I was kind of pushing back on the choice of words around choice. Kind of too many choices in that sentence, but I completely agree with you. I think that to sit down and cultivate a mindfulness practice is well within everybody's capacities. Of course, will everyone do it? Most likely not. Even with my own experience, I read a book called Awakening the Buddha Within back in, this must have been 2011. And I was kind of blown away by the ideas, started to meditate a little bit off and on. It wasn't until 2017 that I built kind of a daily and disciplined practice. And that was after doing a virtual meditation retreat called Camp Calm, which is this amazing program. I think it actually kind of echoes of your Finding Space program, and that it starts with a very short, bite-sized exercise. You do for 30 days, you do a short reading, and then you maybe sit for 5 minutes. And the sitting starts with guided, and then it starts to kind of ease you into unguided, and the sitting gets longer and longer throughout the 30 days. And by the end of that, I had built a daily practice that I've kept until now. So, it took me, 7 years, so to speak. And it's difficult to say, why, or maybe it was certain, contributing factors that were happening in my life. So the choice is 100% there, and it's a choice that we can make. I guess I struggle, and I'd be actually curious to hear from you, Leslie, in when you're speaking to somebody who is completely outside of the world and experience of mindfulness, what type of language and vernacular do you use without, a lot of people, when things start to sound quote unquote woo-woo, they shut down, right? Or they stop paying attention, or things get a little bit too mystical, if you start thinking about enlightenment, they lose interest. But like, what is the kind of crawl, walk, run, or the introductory language that you use to start introducing to people to these concepts?
Well, I guess the good thing about, the time that we're in now, a lot of people would have some sort of entry level understanding of what, or some sort of like, at least a stereotypical conception of what meditation is. If the least of it is just, sitting at the side of a mountain in full lotus position and chanting Om, right? They at least have some idea of what it's all about. And a lot of mainstream media has already discussed a lot of research about its benefits, so to speak. So for me, like, a lot of the time, it's not so much about convincing them what it can do for them, because a lot of people nowadays, I feel, and more know the potential of what it is, right? And like you said, that it's the entry point is the hardest. It's just like that analogy of, going to the gym. The hardest part is actually getting there, right? And it's like anything. I'm writing my book at the moment, and the hardest part for me to write and get into the writing is just to sit down and like put pen to paper. That is the hardest part right now. Or sorry, put words into my word processor, right? That's the technology that I'm using. That's the hardest part. So it's an introduction into the practice itself, in that it is a practice, and just not trying to sell them anything, and not trying to say that, it's as easy as this, or it's easy as de-stressing, or you just, call upon this, magical recording if you need, to get a better night's rest or anything. I'm very practical, and I'm very straightforward and transparent and honest about what it's about. Like my program, the first module, I don't even call that practice meditation. I just want you to literally, listen to my words, just sit down and breathe. Like, don't even think about meditation. Sit down and breathe. Anyone can do that, right? But you also know that the program is at least 7 to 9 months long. And this is how long it takes to even, start to develop a foundation or a semblance of a foundation of meditation. And you know this through your practice. And, we've all done this if we have a consistent practice, right? But that's it for me. Like it's about like, essentially disseminating truth of what I believe it is. And if you resonate with that, it's cool, right? Jump on board. But if you don't, then you will come to a point where you will, right? Or that is my hope anyway. And if you don't, that's cool as well, right? Then my medicine is not for you, but that's fine as well. Like I know that my medicine doesn't cure all. It cures those who resonate and gravitate towards it for whatever reason, whether it's the way that I speak, how I speak the truth about what it is. I'm not hiding anything. I'm not trying to market. I'm simply speaking about, the true essence and what I believe is the best, way forward for creating a daily practice. And that is a lifelong relationship, which will lead to a lifelong relationship with the meditative art. It is an art, it is a practice for life, and like I do use things that that seem like woo woo or highly esoteric, but I say them in a practical manner. And if you take them as esoteric or woo woo, that's just a matter of interpretation in my mind. So really, like for me, if you come to the practice or come to the table, there's a few sort of quotes or aphorisms in the Western philosophy that I love to use to sort of paint the picture of what it's about, right? If you come to the floor with things like, when the student is ready, the teacher will arrive, right? So I'm not going to come as a teacher and say, I'm your teacher. Listen to me. When you're ready, the teacher will arrive for you. And a true master knows nothing, right? So that keeps you humble in knowing that there's always something for you to learn and practice. And then the last one is, before enlightenment, you chop wood and carry water, but after enlightenment, you also chop wood and carry water. Do you know what I mean? So these sorts of things, these are the principles and like foundational understandings that you have to sort of understand and sort of resonate with to enter into something like meditation or any sort of daily practice of mindfulness, because it's like I said, time and time again, it's like the hardest thing in the world, but it's most rewarding as well if you're willing to, commit to it on a consistent basis.
100%. I mean, I continue to be just blown away about how it just touches every aspect of life, right? I mean, it's not unlike we've come back to the fitness example a couple different times, but when I got a little bit more serious about health, it was like, working out, led to eating better, led to better sleep, led to more control over emotions and my mental state, led to just mental capacity, intellectual capacity that was higher. Like our entire lives are like this series of concentric circles. I'm working on this idea called the ecology of human experience, because everything is just so interconnected. And mindfulness is probably the pinnacle of examples when thinking about that. Like it touches everything. It touches literally every single part of life. And I think that's one thing that I often kind of come back to when I talk to people about it, is that like, if there's one thing that you could do that can improve everything else that you do, would you maybe be interested in exploring that? If the answer to that question is not yes, I'm not sure what we're talking about here. Maybe the conversation just kind of falls off the edge if the answer to that question is no, but I don't know.
Absolutely, man.
No, I guess, earlier you were telling us about how your life was always in motion. So how did you actually, you told us about the 45 browsers, and that was kind of a moment where you're like, what is going on? But was there like a point where you just realized that the motion wasn't doing it for you? And then how did you come to mindfulness yourself, Jeremy?
It's a great question. I think about a couple different times in my life. So when I mentioned a few minutes ago when I read the Awakening the Buddha Within, I read that rather back in 2010 as I was going through a breakup with my girlfriend at the time, and lucky for me, we got back together, and she's now my wife, so it didn't completely mess everything up. But I think, of course, that fracture in a very important relationship caused me to start doing some soul searching, and I'm not sure exactly what led me to this specific book or this specific category of books. I do know I grew up as a Baptist Christian, and I say I grew up as a Baptist Christian not because I believed in it really deeply or anything like that. It's just the situation that I was born into. And when my dad got locked up, he converted to Islam while he was in prison. So, I would talk to him on the phone or a few times when he was like out and in between kind of going back, or he was talking to me a lot about Islam. And when he did that, it was kind of the first time that I had considered like, oh, there's a completely different group of people that have a completely different interpretation of these religious texts and a completely different worldview of what it means to live a good life and how one should live. So then when that happened, I was kind of in middle school, and that's the time where people of the Jewish faith start having bar and bat mitzvahs. And I started, I got like the Torah is just, I guess, the Old Testament. So went back and did a lot more reading of the Old Testament. And at that point, I read it from not this is what you should think or how you should live your life, but more of just like, why do people believe what they believe? And like just being curious about belief systems, I guess, more broadly. So I got into high school and I read the Bhagavad Gita. I read a whole host of different religious texts. And this kind of idea came into my mind that like, wow, there's lots of different belief systems. So maybe like people, every different group considers their belief system to be true, right? And to be real. So maybe the Awakening the Buddha was in was another progression of that, because I had never really explored any Eastern traditions or Eastern philosophies at all. So maybe it was just kind of the next iteration of that same exploration. But I think that was a part of it. I think that I'm trying to remember when I did the virtual meditation retreat. I probably found out about it. There's a blog that I often read called Raptitude, and it's a blog all about like mindfulness and how to live a good life. And the guy who writes it was the guy who created Camp Calm. So I think I found out about that course from the blog. That brought me back into the world for the virtual meditation retreat, and that experience was so transformative that from that point on, it completely shook how I saw the world. And I think the biggest thing, or there probably just wasn't one, but there was this one exercise where you would sit down for however long, you could do it for 30 seconds, and you just focus on your breath and you count your breaths. And the challenge, so to speak, or the task was how high could you get in counting before you became distracted? And I think the first time, maybe I got to like 7 and started thinking about something random. And then the next time was like 11, and then it was like 13. And, I was like a month into trying this, and I was at like 24. I was like, wow, like I actually have very little control over my mind. Like here I am thinking I'm exercising so much agency and doing all these things, but actually I have a very untrained mind because I've never actually explored these parts of my mind. And I think that simple exercise completely woke me to the idea that, okay, we do have choice and agency, but most of us just completely ignore that entire mental space, right? So I guess that confluence of different events and experiences kind of led me to this place where mindfulness played a larger part of my life. And what's interesting about mindfulness as it relates to identity, when we first built Idenati, it was kind of a side project to a side project, so to speak. I have a business partner, and we were actually working on building a different software project. And in the process of building that, we needed to share access to tons of different systems. So the database and the CRM and all the different developer tools and these things. So for a while, we were just like text messaging each other, here's the password for this, or here's the URL for this. And we were like 4 months into this project, and we had like 40 different systems that we were using. So this process of texting and trying to figure things out that way was just completely untenable. So my partner, being a brilliant engineer, kind of built this simple tool over a weekend that would allow us to simplify and organize all the different tools that we were using. So that was just for the two of us, was just an internal tool. And, we mentioned it to a couple of friends as we were, at happy hours and these types of things. And, about 6 months later, there were like 150 people using this thing that wasn't even our primary project. And we were like, this is interesting. So I started to think about okay, clearly this helps us kind of simplify and organize this, but we were using it so much that we just started having conversations of like, why is this so useful? What is this actually doing? What is the problem that it's actually solving? And a friend of mine recommended me a book called The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. And her idea is that, organizing your home or your physical space can be this tool for organizing your mind, right? If you can be more intentional about the things that you buy and how you fill your space, then you can be more intentional about everything that you do in life. So people would go through Marie Kondo's kind of organizing process, and then they would write to her like a month later and they got a divorce, or they rekindled their relationship with their children, or they lost a bunch of weight, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it hit me kind of in that moment as I finished reading that book that, wow, organizing your life on the internet is the same thing. Actually, this whole mindfulness thing that I've been exploring, this is just bringing intentionality to the internet in a very literal way. And that's when it kind of clicked at me of wow, not only is this super useful, there's actually a huge opportunity here, not just the literal organization of the things that you do on the internet, but I kind of felt like there's an opportunity to create a Trojan horse, so to speak, of infiltrating people's minds with mindfulness without necessarily even telling them that that's what we're doing. And as they use the software and adopt it and it becomes an everyday part of their life, then they start listening to the podcasts, and then they start reading some of the emails, and then they start being more intentional about other aspects of their life. And it just became this kind of snowball of excitement and vibrancy. And then kind of the whole business and vision was born from there. So there was a lot of different things that kind of piled on top of each other to create kind of how I operate today.
And I think usually that is the way things will, unfold and manifest for themselves. There's no, to me, what I took from your story and what you just shared there is that there really isn't a fixed path, or there isn't any sort of clarity to be had in terms of how we get to the points we get to. But the keys to getting there really is having I guess a sense of an awareness and honoring that curiosity that we have within ourselves, and just like asking a little bit further, why was I curious about this thing? Like, you know, to your example about all the different, you know, exploration of theological texts, right? From one principle to the other, one discipline to the other, that sort of started, you know, from your religious upbringing, up until the notion or the expansion of understanding of different types of texts, or knowing that there are different types of understandings and interpretations of theological text. And then, you know, that has led you to doing the things that you do today, like in a roundabout way, but it always seems to be that way, right? In terms of like intentionality. And it always just comes back to, if we have an awareness of these intuitive, curious cues within ourselves, we owe it to ourselves to honor them, respect them, and to the very least, just ask a question: why? You know, why do I feel a little bit of something towards this? And if it means something to you, wonderful. If it doesn't, that's cool as well, you know. But like, to me, it's like these, you're gathering all these mini, or just finding all these like mini puzzle pieces along the way of this, like, you know, emotional roller coaster of life. And then eventually you'll have like your pockets full of these puzzle pieces that don't come together as much until one specific moment when everything just comes together and joins everything together into like I guess a visible, interpretable image for yourself that is like really more representative of a I guess an inner yearning of life, or innate sort of gravitation towards for yourself. So yeah, I mean, I think that we could talk for hours. And I think, like, you know, even if we left this open to, like, you know, Joe Rogan style, we would far exceed the 3-4 hours. But what I might do is that I'm gonna probably end this one here for now, but we will definitely have to have you back on, Jeremy. You know, because like I said, I'm sure that we have much more to talk about and sort of discuss and just you know, converse over. So yeah, thank you for joining us today, mate. Really appreciate your time, and it was an absolute pleasure to chat with you again. And like I said, I'm looking forward to our next one. But I want to give you the space to, you know, share about yourself, anything that you want to plug, your websites, things like this, and to our audience, and so they can find you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys having me on. Yeah, fruitful conversations are one of my favorite activities to partake in, and you two gentlemen make that incredibly easy and enjoyable to do. So again, I appreciate the time from you guys and the invite. As far as me, from a personal perspective, I'm on all the major platforms. Probably the ones that I'm most active are Instagram and Twitter. So Twitter is jhurst12 and Instagram is jhurst1221. I love the number 12. It was my basketball number starting when I was 6 years old, and it has made its way throughout my life in every facet since then. So you'll see that number show up a lot. On the identity side, it's a little bit of a weird spelling, Idenati. So that's just identity.com, and then identity on all the social platforms as well. So feel free to reach out. We're always down to connect with folks.
Yeah, thanks, man. And we will add all those links in the show notes for people to find you. So yeah, people can look you up and say good day and touch base with Jeremy. So yeah, Shaun, where can people find you, mate?
Yeah, easiest place to find me is just on Instagram. So Shaun_Coop, that's SHAUN_COOP. And how about you, Les? Where can I find you?
Yeah, you can touch base with me through my website, findingspace.co. You can touch base with me through that medium and say good day, send me an email, or, you know, find out more about, you know, my offerings. It's all on there on my website, findingspace.co, as well as my social platforms, Facebook and Instagram. It's also findingspace.co. if you want to send Shaun and I an email directly through for this podcast, if you want to ask us any questions, or you want to get in touch with Jeremy, or you want to become a guest, anything at all, our email address is thehustleandflowpodcast@gmail.com.
Cool. And I just want to take a moment, Jeremy, to just thank you again for coming on today, man. It was really enjoyable for me, and I know it would be for Les as well, speaking for him, which I don't usually like to do. But yeah, man, it was a real pleasure. And I can tell you're a really inquisitive individual, and, it's really interesting, the steps of your life from where you've come from to where you are today. And like Les said, all those puzzle pieces, they sound like they're clicking for you now in identity and how that's come together for you. And I'm really excited to see how that pans out for you. So thanks again for joining us, man, and for sharing your story with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Definitely will take you guys up on the round 2 at some point in the future. So very much looking forward to it.
Awesome. Looking forward to it too. And if you're listening and made it this far, if you got something out of the conversation today, which I'm sure you did, please just share it with one other person, family member, friend, a colleague, someone that just loves podcasts and want to give them something interesting to listen to, because that's how we grow the podcast. We don't advertise. We just really want to have these conversations, get them into the ears of people, and hopefully you take as much from them as we do and do something with them, have a different perspective, think a bit differently, feel a bit differently, and then do a bit differently. So until next time, guys.
See you guys.
Cheers.